We'll now shift gears and focus on education, workforce, and sustainability. Alan Arkatov, the Executive Director of Learning Transformation Studios at ASU, will moderate a crucial discussion on building a sustainable future through education.
Good afternoon, everybody. This panel, Education, the Workforce, and Sustainability. This is all about green skilling, and as vocabulary is very important. We're going to get into that, what green skilling means and the implications, both in India, the US, and around the world. How appropriate that we are here at the Oberoi, which is 100% solar panel powered, in a world where climate change is profoundly changing how we live, how education is shifting to meet the extraordinary demands of India, the US, and the world is so crucial. And we're so happy to be having this conversation with such distinguished panelists. Mary Leslie, the CEO of the LA Business Council and governor of the ISO board, which is the energy grid for California. And Vikram Kapur, group president of Renew, one of the world's leading green energy companies. And Livleen Kahlon, the associate director of the Energy and Resources Institute, better known as TERI. So there are so many issues out there, but I thought, Vikram, we'd start with you on what are the skills that we are seeing expanding in terms of demand for the energy transition, and what are the challenges that need to be overcome? And give us a little bit, because I know numbers, you come from a long history with McKinsey and others, where numbers come in giant reports, but the numbers are staggering. So put things in context for us.
Sure. Thank you so much, Alan. And I represent Renew, which is amongst India's largest renewable energy companies. While we are very young, about 13 years old, but we have become the largest in India. We've invested almost $12 billion in the last 10, 12 years to build a 17 gigawatt portfolio. So just to put things into perspective, this whole energy transition, this is the topic of our times, right? And many reports, whether it is McKinsey or otherwise, I think if you read the kind of investment that this transition is going to take is roughly in the ballpark, depending upon which report you read, between $3 to $5 trillion every year, starting this year all the way up to 2050. So this is $3 to $5 trillion every year, starting this year all the way up to 2050. Now, to put this number into perspective, because most of us don't think in trillions in our day-to-day life, oil and gas industry is possibly the most well-established industry. Globally, oil and gas industry over the last many decades has not spent more than $1 trillion every year. So this is 3 times of what oil and gas industry spends on an average over the last many decades. So that's the scale of transition. That's the macro of it. So it's massive. Converting it into a little bit of a micro and what skills are we looking for, I would say that there is an explosion in both quantity of skills, quantity of the manpower required, and the slivers or the variety of people who are required, right? So let me give an example from the Indian context. So Indian Prime Minister has set a very ambitious target of building out about 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity in this country by 2030. So 2030 is around the corner when it comes from infrastructure standpoint. Every project takes 3 to 4 years to build out. It's around a corner. Today, we are standing at about 140, 150 megawatts. So which means that in literally 6 years, we need to triple what we have done over the last 20 years. So India needs to triple what we have done in the last 20 years, right? That means, we need more people to manufacture more modules. So in India itself, that's the one skill set, specific skill set. This means people who can work on pretty advanced machines, which churn out gigawatts of modules every year. We put up a factory in Jaipur, and pretty much overnight we had to add maybe 3,000 to 4,000 people in that particular factory. We're adding another one middle of this year. And in our country right now, possibly there could be maybe 40 to 50 such factories under construction in various stages. So the manufacturing of all the inputs which goes in is one particular area of skill set which is required. It's a lot of manufacturing related. Second, if we have to meet that 500 gigawatt, today India does about 15 gigawatts every year. We need to scale it up from 15 to 40 gigawatts, 45 gigawatts every year. That means we need more engineers, right? People who can plan, design, some of these things. That means within the government infrastructure, we need people who can do a lot more permitting, because you need government approvals to execute this. That means we need more people who are adept with land acquisition, because this requires acres and acres of land. What it will also mean is by 2030, India would have 500 gigawatts of operating assets. Now, those operating assets needs people who are trained to operate and maintain it. So you need maintenance engineers, you need security guards, you need people who can clean the outgrowth of grass in large scale, utility scale. So I would say that, and this is just one renewable energy sliver. There are many other slivers. For example, Honorable Prime Minister had launched the rooftop solar scheme, which would mean almost 1 crore, 10 million households in India over the next few years would want to install many of these solar panels on their roof. Now that requires installation, people who are able to install some of those things, right? Green hydrogen, carbon related. So I would say that, Alan, to your question, the numbers are just staggering, both in quantum and the variety of skills which are required. Now, what's the gap? I would say the gap is that, the first gap is just realization that this is a pretty immense task at every level, right? I think that's sinking in. It's not yet fully sunk in, I would say. Second, I would say is that, it requires a significant academia, education sector, and the renewable energy sector collaboration. Because this is churning, skilling people at industrial scale, right? This is not about putting one more college. So this requires very, very different type of thought processes. I'm not an education expert, so I don't know what those specifically could be. I think there is money available because, I was talking about the investment numbers, and without this skilling happening, those investment numbers cannot happen. And if I was to put the cost of skilling these people, it will be a very small percentage of the total investment that we are talking about, right? So capital is available. We need models. We need approaches by way of which we can skill people at an industrial scale in a relatively short span of time. Right? So that's what I would say.
So thank you for that. And again, I think context is so important, and staggering these numbers. And again, I'm thinking about, we always, on the economic side of things, we talk about supply and demand. There's a lot of demand, driving supply here. And so that shift, the massive shift, is going to be so consequential. Livleen, we're talking about what he has seen from the private sector side of what the actual numbers are, the demand, in terms of what is going to be required physically in all the various components. That leads to the obvious question of, how are the higher ed institutions in India prepared to meet this demand in this kind of global race, and to meet the skills in all these various sectors? And what is the preparedness of these institutions in India? And how is that, when you've looked around the globe, India obviously with now the world's largest population, extraordinary, but give us context of, are these institutions ready? I'm afraid I know the answer. And again, the organization that she helps lead, TERI, 750 odd folks, they could have 7,500 folks. It wouldn't be enough, but give us context of how higher ed is ready.
Thank you, Alan. As already introduced, I represent the Energy and Resources Institute, and we are in our 50th year of celebration this year. So in our journey of 50 years, we have seen a lot of change related to, of course, the demand and also the availability of informed and skilled workforce to meet the changing scenario of jobs. But I will not speak about that. I'm going to focus my comments on the education sector. All of you who are from India, you are aware that currently we have in operation the National Education Policy Framework. And this NEP 2020 has made a lot of changes in both the school education system and the higher education system. So when we look at the higher education system, UGC, University Grants Commission, has now introduced a compulsory 4-credit course on environment awareness and community engagement. So when this type of excellent reform has been introduced, the institutions are running, they are literally trying to keep in pace to the requirement of this commission, and they are looking for helpers to assist them in this change. So we were talking of how can we look at numbers and how we can bridge the gaps and all. One point that comes to my mind is partnerships are very, very essential. And partnerships with businesses, with corporates is something that is going to change the way we are looking at our education, the way we are looking at our skills, and we are looking at our markets and workforce. Till the businesses humanize development, we will not be touching the core of reforms. Even when we give jobs, there are jobs available for youngsters. Are those jobs enough, or is that training enough to capture the career longevity? So much of changes are happening with introduction of AI. So what is it that the youth force, the workforce needs that will make them more resilient to changes, and also they will be able to adapt to the faster changes that are happening? So a lot of soft skill training, a lot of focus on 21st century skills is something that is very, very essential. And that requirement we cannot leave to the businesses on their own, because they have their own growth trajectory. We need partnerships from players in the field where they can do hand-holding with students, with the youth, over their course of actual training and through the internships that now the country is strongly promoting. From the school level under NEP, there is a shift towards vocational education, which is happening at the middle school level. And when we speak about the higher education system at undergraduate system, we are seeing that a lot of internship opportunities is something that the workforce is getting introduced to. So this needs to be looked into very, very carefully. And then when we speak about 2030, around 25% of our Indian population will be under the age group of 29. So when we have such a young, and currently we are about like under 35, we are 66%, with such a strong group of youth representatives, and we also need to acknowledge all of them having different and varied levels of intelligence. We know the 9 levels of intelligence. All of them will not be ready with the motor skills to be skilled on green skills. We will need students who are more on the sociology and psychology backgrounds to change their mind frame. We will need more people to do hand-holding. So all the different skills that we are talking of, all the different intelligence levels that we are talking of need to be instilled from the school level. We need a trained workforce. What about the teachers? What about the faculty members who are currently sort of giving out the modules and trainings that they have been doing over the last 2 or 3 decades? A big shift is happening. How well are we training the faculty members to keep themselves abreast to the changes that are happening in the global framework? So a lot of business partnerships with research institutions, a lot of peer-to-peer learning opportunities, a lot of shift at looking at the mind frame and sort of changing the mind frame mindsets of students right at the school level is something that is very, very essential. So I will just pause here and maybe we can take a look at the next question.
So when you think about Vikram, when he set the table in terms of the supply and demand, or demand and supply on the energy, you've now talked about supply and demand, or demand and supply for education. Mary, you have a long history of leading on public policy. So you were a deputy mayor in Los Angeles. You were the deputy director of the Small Business Administration for the United States. Talk to us the role that government can play in shaping education and workforce development in the context of sustainability for clean energy in the year 2024, where this is not a far off piece. California, the fourth largest economy in the world. We're dealing with India, the largest population in the world. How do you get government bodies, which are the framers of how to do the business side, the education side, how does this play out in the real world?
Well, thank you. And I think a couple things are happening. I think that government is responsible for creating this new market, essentially through our laws regarding climate change. This has been a decade in the making, the realization that we have to have this transformation in the way we produce our energy. And I think now what you're seeing is this tremendous demand, these huge goals, right? You know, Modi committed that we're going to be at zero carbon by 2070. President Biden said we're going to be at zero carbon by 2050. Governor Newsom said we're going to be at zero carbon by 2045. And in Los Angeles, we say we're going to get to zero carbon by 2035. So you can just pick a year, okay? But any way that you cut it, you have to get off coal and gas, and you have to make this radical transformation. The motivation to scale, what's exciting about it is this could be an equitable transition that involves many more people. We will only be successful if we can engage a very broad base of workers, right? So women who traditionally have not been in the energy sector per se will have to be in the energy sector in this transition. People from all socioeconomic levels will have to engage. What's happening is the skills for this transition are highly technical. Technology is the #1 sector. And so India is particularly well positioned, having, producing so many engineers and highly technical people. In fact, many of the people that we rely on in the United States have come from India. So I think what we have to now do is figure out each other's best practices. The urgency to engage and create an equitable transition will be highly motivating in terms of employment and in terms of fairness in our society to help people economically. And the question is, can we, through the education systems, traditional and non-traditional, create curriculum that may not be what we see today? My favorite is that at the CAISO, at the California Independent Systems Operator, I asked for the list of what are the skills that we recruit and where do we recruit, or the people that work there. 600 people work there to regulate the grid. Literally, it's Stanford, Harvard, you name it, all the top schools. Congratulations, ASU is one of the schools we recruit from actively. But what's funny about it is you see all the classic titles, engineering, technology, electrical engineering, transmission. You see people with analytical skills, you see people with soft skills. But what you don't see is you don't see new things like creative hacker. Okay, creative hacker
and that's
is actually
literally
a category.
It's actually a category.
It's actually a job
for the grid.
description at the California grid. Yeah.
So that's kind of scary for everybody. So again, when you're listening to each other, again, just the numbers are staggering. Government is feeling the urgency, I believe. I think they realize it in terms of global warming. They realize it in terms of the populations, in terms of the ramifications for health. So how are we translating these things in real time at a local, state, and federal level?
So, I'll just comment upon some of the things that Livleen and Mary said. That, I think one recognition is that in the last 20 years, most transformations globally have been digital, right? The way we send emails, the way we deal with data, now AI, etc. This is a physical transformation. This is a physical transformation because real assets would need to be created on the ground, right? And therefore, there is definitely a role which digital education needs to play, but I think it needs to be complemented with physical infrastructure. What does it mean to efficiently install a solar panel? What does it mean to basically maintain a turbine which is hoisted 60 meters in the air, right? And so on and so forth, right? So I think that's that combination of physical and digital is at a very different scale is one thing which needs to be taken into account. In terms of your specific question, Alan, on what I think the industry is playing its part. So I'll give you two examples to bring that to life, right? So for example, when we were executing our projects in the western part of India, this is a place called Run of Kutch in Gujarat. And this is, just imagine, flat land, nothing grows there. It is pretty barren, salty land. And there were but it was perfect for a solar farm, right? But what we used to struggle with is, where do you find solar technicians, right, in that kind of an area? And then what we realized is that a large group of women in that particular area used to earn money by doing salt pan farming to produce, and they used to use their bare hands to do it, which has health consequences, and they used to earn pretty meager amounts. So one effort that we took was to retrain them as solar technicians. So it sort of tripled their income, because this is a much more value-adding job. It was much more healthier because they were not using this thing and so on. So that's sort of one example of methodologies that corporate is taking, pretty much driven by the demand supply and what you can do. And there are many examples like this. For example, another sliver is, there's a lot of carbon finance which is flowing into, for example, carbon removal projects. Because of the way the targets have been set, the net zero targets have been set, and by companies as well as governments. So let's say a company, for example, Microsoft, has taken a target to be net zero by 2030. Now, it can do a certain set of things within its boundary, but then there is always this residual 10-15% left. So for that, they want to execute a carbon removal project in India. Now, that project would require a very different kind of skill set. For example, it would require people on the ground who have to go out and educate the rural households in India how to use a superior quality cook stove, right? Because today they do a very basic chulha, which is a mud stove with some woods which they cut from a nearby area. How do you graduate? Now you need, and if you have to do that for 100 million households, it requires an army of very different skill sets, etc. So I would say that there is, the corporate is looking at it from a demand supply and then what's available and then how can I reskill. But I'm sure that there is a much more, as I was saying, an industrial skilling way of doing it, maybe through partnerships or some things like that. So that's sort of, at least from my vantage.
We're at an ed tech conference, and we have a lot of brilliant people here from India, US, around the world. Livleen, you know that education is not a fast-moving entity. And again, I keep coming back to, if everyone who's here and listening, these numbers are staggering. And history would say that education will not be able to meet this demand. And yet the consequences, I'm trying to understand, how do we, it's incentivization, so we have a lot of private equity folks, we have a lot of government folks here. What will be the pieces that change higher ed? Because what Vikram talked about is, it isn't just the technology piece and online courses, et cetera. It is traditional workforce training, it is everything, it is all the above and then tenfold. What are going to be the realities of what you're dealing with every day to dramatically change? Because again, there is no choice. The path is clear, right? So walk us through how that occurs.
May I just put in a statement here, it is so important to demystify the word green skills.
Yeah, but again, that's a perfect example, by the way. In the US, we don't even use that word.
Yes, yes. So it is not an elite term. It's not an elite terminology. And we should not be putting off people by using these words and all, meaning that it is beyond your reach. So what we want to say when we say green skill is, are we training our youth workforce enough to be able to map the heat stress that their community is facing? Are we able to train our youth enough to be able to segregate and recycle the waste that they are generating? Are we able to sensitize and create awareness about organics and good food quality, nutrient eating amongst the youth workforce. So while these terminologies are being introduced, it is so important to be able to connect to their day-to-day living. And then, here when we're talking of numbers, numbers are big and numbers are very, very, I would say, unbalanced and spread across the country. We have to deal with the challenge of vernacular. We have to deal with the challenge of different climate systems. We have to deal with the challenge of different policy and frameworks. The NEP, the National Education Policy itself, how it is being implemented at state level is a big case study in itself. So when all these different type of challenges are there, how do we have a workforce that is ready to look and opportunize on the skills training that is available, and how well are they equipped to reach to the right jobs? That is the question. And here, like in TERI, we do a program called Green Olympiad. We had started, it's like now a 25-year-old project with the schools. And it was a very, very simple question-answer activity that the students were doing, and we were sort of mapping their awareness level about different issues. Now we have translated it to colleges and universities. And when we are doing that, we are having a case study approach. Because it is now not important to know what is right or wrong, but it is more important to know how one will respond to a change that is happening. The answers cannot be fixed in timelines. Answers will keep evolving, and that is why I again go back to the 21st century skill pitch. Till they are equipped, till they are ready to unlearn, relearn, learn about what is happening around them, it will be very difficult. The jobs will be available, but the workforce will not be available. Or they would not be aware that this is happening. So AI is a very good boon in a lot of ways. A lot of trainings are happening, but how many students are enrolling themselves for these programs, for these tutorials and all, is something that needs to be done. So again, it brings back partnerships at grassroots level, going local as much as possible, and also evaluating the impact of the programs that we are creating almost every year. So I think that is very, very critical, and we need to sort of destructure, look at a local state level to be able to look and deal with the numbers we are talking about.
So Mary, and for all the panelists, so this in-between space, this interstitial space that each of you have talked about, traditional skills, the new world skills, it feels like, the panel just before this was about AI. So there's this extraordinary hope. There are obviously some real challenges and fears, but isn't this an extraordinary opportunity for old world skill sets to meet the new world skill sets, and have this moment, this crisis moment to meet it? So Mary, start off this last round of discussion with all of us about that in-between space, that interstitial space of real-world skills meeting academic training, and for the sustainability sector. That is a easy enough thing to say, or I stutter around, but how do we do it?
Well, honestly, being here today is sort of inspiring me to do things a little bit differently, because honestly, I've been in this space for 2 decades, and you're right, we talk to each other. People that are in the energy world talk to people in the energy world, people in the education world, they talk to people in the energy, you're in our silos, right? So it means that we have to really make a conscious effort. I was very excited to read right before I came here that the US Department of Education in the United States is actually convening 300 educators. They're working on curriculum because they're trying to cross over with these new opportunities in new clean energy and climate. So part of this is at all levels of government, at all levels of industry, at all levels of nonprofit, this consciousness that you're no longer in your silo, so that you have to approach things in a much more integrated way. So we're lucky in Los Angeles, we have something called the Clean LA Incubator. Matt was supposed to be on this panel with us today. unfortunately, he's sick in the United States. But what this incubator does in LA, and when you come to LA, we need you to come visit. I'm on the board of it. It's one of those places that's creating the disruption that we need to get to a new solution. So what do I mean by that? It's an incubator for new companies to come that are young companies, and it's doing training, and it's integrating the new goals and objectives into actual startups and targeting them towards sectors that really need innovation and technology. And then there's a whole place that you can actually innovate as part of it. And our major utility is also housed there, where they do a lot of their testing. So you're creating a physical environment where a lot of things are happening at the same time. This is probably exactly what we need, because this is how you get the next way of doing things, is you mix a bunch of things that were never together before. and then all of a sudden, so like for instance, we have a new regulation that our governor said no, we have to have all electric vehicles after 2035. You can't buy gas vehicles, so we have to electrify our ports, right? Well, it turns out, with that understanding, a new company was developed at Lacey that does EV charging training. They created a model for the first time that's now being standardized in the US in 50 states. Okay, that came out of this incubator because it just happened that there was a heightened awareness of what the goals were, combined with people with a lot of technical expertise, combined with innovation. And we haven't really talked about innovation at all and what it takes to spur innovation. So that's where I think I'm saying, in the gap, we're gonna need a lot of innovation.
It'd be interesting to have people like Matt, hello back home in Los Angeles, with Lacey. We need to have that here in India. We need to have that across Southeast Asia. We need to have that everywhere. Lightning round as we, again, think about these gaps. I keep hearing in the back of my head when I'm listening to you, like, education, it isn't that we won't know how to do it. It's going to be how we communicate it and translate it in rapid cycle, right? So that's a communications issue. I like to say that we don't have education issues as much as we have communications issues, but it also sounds to me we have a lot of investors in the room. And this is a massive, massive, trillions of dollars going into this space. How do we incentivize this sector in a rapid cycle way?
So I think there are two. I think we need to Mary's point, I think we need to get people together. I think we need to give them a peep into our part of the world, the educationalists and so on and so forth, people who are really, to show them the skill sets that we need and the scale at which we need them and timelines in which we need them at. I think that's one. So that requires, and that's happening, I would say, in a very cottage industry way, a small initiative there, small initiative there, but maybe if it's a India-US collaboration, which is something which is a lot more systemic and at scale, I think that's one thought. Second thing, which is a learning a little bit from, a lot of things in the new sectors or subsectors, even within the renewable space, you have to exchange ideas. See, if something is working in one part of the world, how do we figure out mechanisms to share that learning and replicate, right? Replicate at scale, because look, we are in it together, right? Carbon dioxide emitted here is going to equally affect everyone else around the globe, right? So I think those are the two mechanisms, yes. Which I think we'll need to put into place.
Livleen, we have just a half a minute. Go. Last word.
Yes. If we can have carbon credits, why can't we have education credits set up for business houses? So this investment, this is very, very essential. We incentivize businesses to investing in education, and also we join the dots between the academics and the businesses.
So thank you everyone for being here. May the green skilling be with you, and thank you so much.